Marcus Thompson stepped out of the subway station and into the bustling morning air of New York City. The streets were alive with the sounds of honking cars, chattering pedestrians, and the distant wail of an ambulance. He adjusted his tie, a deep navy blue that paired perfectly with his tailored charcoal suit, and took a moment to absorb the energy that surrounded him. Today was critical. His presentation could be the turning point in his career at the prestigious tech firm where he had worked tirelessly for the past 6 years. As he navigated through the crowd, he couldn't shake off the familiar weight that settled on his shoulders. The expectations that came with being one of the few black executives in a predominantly white environment. With each step towards the office building, Marcus reflected on his journey. He had faced countless challenges, from subtle microaggressions to overt discrimination. Yet, he had persevered, believing that his hard work and dedication would eventually break down the barriers that seemed insurmountable. "You can't let them define you," he murmured under his breath, recalling the words of his mentor who had guided him through the murky waters of corporate life. He pushed the revolving doors open and stepped into the lobby, his heart racing in anticipation. As he approached the elevator, Marcus noticed the usual morning crowd. His colleagues chatting casually, engrossed in their phones, or sipping coffee as they prepared for the day ahead. He offered a nod and a warm smile to a few familiar faces, but their responses were lukewarm at best. He couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment. He had always strived to build rapport and camaraderie, but often felt like an outsider in a world that didn't fully embrace him. Taking a deep breath, he entered the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor, where the executive offices were located. The doors slid shut, and for a brief moment, he was alone with his thoughts. He rehearsed his pitch in his mind, visualizing the room filled with executives nodding approvingly as he laid out his innovative ideas for the next big product launch. If only they could see him for who he truly was, a capable leader, not just a black man navigating a predominantly white space. The elevator chimed, and the doors opened to a bustling office filled with the hum of conversations and the tapping of keyboards. As he stepped out, he was greeted by the familiar sight of his colleagues, but today, he felt an unusual tension in the air. Marcus brushed it off, focusing instead on the task at hand. However, as he walked towards his desk, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Moments later, as he gathered his materials for the presentation, an unsettling encounter unfolded. He approached the entrance of the building, ready to grab a coffee from the cafe across the street. Just as he reached the door, 2 security personnel, clad in dark uniforms, stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "Excuse me, sir," one of them said, a stern expression etched on his face. "Can we see some identification?" Marcus blinked in confusion. "I work here," he replied, reaching into his pocket to retrieve his ID badge. "I'm Marcus Thompson, from the executive team." The guard's eyes narrowed, and he exchanged a look with his partner. "We need to verify that. You might be trying to gain unauthorized access." Marcus felt his pulse quicken, disbelief washing over him. "I assure you, I'm not an intruder. I have a presentation in less than an hour." "Here's my ID," he insisted, holding it out for them to see. Instead of easing their suspicion, the guards merely glanced at his badge and then back at him, their expressions unchanging. "We'll need to call the police to confirm your identity," the other guard stated flatly. "Call the police?" Marcus echoed, his voice tinged with incredulity. "I'm not a criminal. I'm an executive at this company." But his protests fell on deaf ears. As the guards pulled out their radios, Marcus felt a deep sense of humiliation wash over him. He glanced around, hoping for a familiar face to come to his aid, but the office buzz continued, as if he were invisible. The weight of the situation settled heavily on his chest, and a sinking feeling of dread began to creep in. He was being treated like a suspect in his own workplace, and the reality of that injustice hit him hard. As the sirens blared in the distance, Marcus's heart sank. He had worked so hard to climb the corporate ladder, only to find himself cornered like a criminal. Would anyone stand up for him? Would his colleagues recognize the absurdity of this situation? The media was sure to catch wind of this incident, and he could only imagine how it would be spun. The thought ignited a fire within him, a resolve to fight back against the injustice he was facing, not just for himself, but for all those who had been marginalized in a system that too often failed to protect them. As Marcus Thompson walked into the sleek, glass-walled office of his tech firm, the weight of the world felt heavier than ever. The media frenzy surrounding his recent humiliation loomed in his thoughts like an ominous cloud, and the whispers in the hallways were an unrelenting reminder of the stigma that now surrounded him. He could sense the eyes of some colleagues on him, a mixture of pity and discomfort, while others pretended he didn't exist at all. "Hey, Marcus," called out Sarah, a close colleague who had always admired his dedication and leadership. She approached him cautiously, her expression a blend of concern and empathy. "I just wanted to say that I know what happened wasn't right. You didn't deserve that." Marcus appreciated her support, but it felt like a fragile lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. "Thanks, Sarah. I can't believe this is happening," he replied, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I've worked so hard to build my reputation here, and now it feels like it's all crumbling. I've heard some people talking behind your back. It's disheartening," she admitted, lowering her voice. "But there are others who are on your side. You're not alone in this." With a faint nod, Marcus tried to hold onto the glimmer of hope in her words, but as he made his way to his desk, he couldn't shake off the feeling of isolation. The office buzzed with the usual energy, but it felt muted, as if everyone were navigating around an invisible barrier that had been erected since the incident. Later that evening, Marcus returned home, exhausted from the emotional toll of the day. Lisa, his wife, was waiting for him in the living room, her eyes filled with love and understanding. She could see the turmoil etched across his face, and without a word, she wrapped her arms around him, grounding him in a moment of solace. "I can't believe this is happening to you," she said softly, pulling back to look into his eyes. "How are you holding up?" "It's rough, Lisa. I feel like I'm in a nightmare that won't end. Some people at work are supportive, but others, they act like I'm the criminal," Marcus confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to fight this." Lisa sat down beside him, her expression resolute. "You're stronger than you think, Marcus. This isn't just about you. It's about all the injustices that are happening around us. You have to turn this into something positive, to fight back." "I want to, but where do I even start?" "I'm just one person," he said, the weight of despair creeping into his tone. "You start by speaking up. You have a platform, and people are watching. Use your voice to challenge the status quo," she urged, her passion igniting a spark within him. "You can't let them silence you." Marcus took a deep breath, her words resonating within him. He knew she was right. This was bigger than just his personal struggle. It was a systemic issue that needed to be addressed. "You're right. I can't just sit back and let this define me. I have to confront it head-on." The following day, Marcus made the difficult decision to approach Richard Blake, the CEO of the company. He felt a mixture of anger and anxiety as he walked into the executive office. Richard was reviewing documents, his brow furrowed in concentration. The tension in the room was palpable. "Marcus, what can I do for you?" Richard asked, looking up but not quite meeting his gaze. "I need to talk to you about what happened," Marcus stated firmly, his heart pounding. "I want an apology, and I think it's time we review our racial bias policies. This incident has highlighted a serious problem within our company." Richard leaned back in his chair, a dismissive expression crossing his face. "You know how these things go, Marcus. There are always misunderstandings. I don't think it warrants a company-wide review." "Misunderstanding? I was treated like a criminal in my own workplace," Marcus shot back, unable to contain his frustration. "This is not just about me. It's about how our company treats its employees, especially those who don't fit the mold." Richard's demeanor hardened. "You need to understand that we have a reputation to protect. This incident is already behind us. Let's focus on moving forward." Marcus felt a wave of anger wash over him, mingling with a profound sense of isolation. "You don't get it. This isn't just going to disappear. I refuse to let this go without a fight." As he left Richard's office, the anger simmering beneath the surface was matched only by a growing determination. He would not allow himself to be silenced. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he could feel the stirring of a purpose deep within him. It was time to break the barriers that had held him back, not just for himself, but for everyone who had faced injustice in their own lives. Marcus sat at the long conference table in the small meeting room, his heart racing as he looked around at his colleagues. The atmosphere was charged with a mix of apprehension and hope. They had come together, a group of individuals who had faced similar discrimination in the workplace, united by the need to confront the insidious racism that pervaded their company culture. He cleared his throat, ready to take the lead. "Thank you all for being here," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside him. "We all know why we're here. What happened to me could happen to any one of us. It's time we stand up and raise our voices." The room was filled with nods of agreement. Angela, a junior developer, spoke up. "I faced something similar last month. I was locked out of the building for an hour because the security team claimed I didn't belong here. I showed them my ID, but they still wouldn't let me in." Marcus felt a surge of solidarity as he listened to Angela. "Exactly. This isn't just about me. It's about all of us who have been marginalized and made to feel unwelcome in our workplace." John, a mid-level manager, leaned forward. "I've heard whispers about how the security team profiles employees. I've seen it happen. We need to gather evidence and present it to the higher-ups." "Right," Marcus said, his mind racing with the possibilities. "If we can compile our experiences and back them up with data, we can make a compelling case. We need to expose the deeper issues at play here." As the group collaborated, ideas flowed freely, each member contributing their stories and insights. They decided to create a plan to raise awareness about workplace discrimination, collecting testimonies and evidence from anyone willing to share their experiences. The determination in the room was palpable, a fire igniting within them. After the meeting, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. He spent the next few days gathering information and interviewing colleagues. One afternoon, while sifting through security protocols, he stumbled upon some alarming documents. His heart sank as he read the instructions that outlined a profiling policy specifically targeting Black employees. It was a chilling revelation that confirmed his fears about systemic issues within the company. "Marcus," Angela called, interrupting his thoughts. She had just walked into his office with an excited expression. "You won't believe what I just discovered. I found a couple of emails discussing the profiling practices." "Emails?" Marcus asked, his curiosity piqued. "What do they say?" "They mention that the security team is explicitly instructed to be extra vigilant around Black employees. It's all coded language, but it's clear what they're implying," she replied, her voice filled with disbelief. "We need to present this," Marcus urged, his mind racing. "This is the kind of evidence that can't be ignored. If we can show that the company's own policies are contributing to this environment, it will give our claims more weight." The group reconvened to discuss their findings, the atmosphere charged with urgency. They meticulously laid out their evidence, preparing to present it at the upcoming company-wide meeting. Marcus felt a mix of anxiety and excitement as the day drew near. They knew they were taking a significant risk, but the thought of remaining silent was unbearable. On the day of the meeting, anticipation hung thick in the air. Employees filed into the auditorium, some curious, others skeptical. Marcus stood before them, flanked by his colleagues, their expressions determined. He took a deep breath and began to speak, addressing the room with conviction. "Today, we are here to discuss something that affects us all. We need to confront the uncomfortable truths about our workplace culture and the disparities that exist within it. We cannot allow fear to keep us silent any longer." Just as he was gaining momentum, the doors swung open, and Richard Blake strode in, his presence commanding immediate attention. The room fell silent, tension crackling like static electricity. Marcus steeled himself for the confrontation he had anticipated but hoped would not come. Richard's gaze swept over the group, his expression a mixture of disdain and disbelief. "What is the meaning of this?" he interrupted, his authoritative voice cutting through the air. "You think your claims hold any merit? This is a waste of time." Marcus's heart raced as he faced the CEO. "These aren't just claims. They are experiences shared by many of us. We have evidence that suggests systemic discrimination is happening within our organization." Richard scoffed, dismissing them with a wave of his hand. You can't possibly believe that your little group has any real understanding of the complexities of our security protocols. This is unfounded. The room erupted in murmurs, the tension palpable. Marcus felt the weight of frustration and anger swell within him. He had expected resistance, but the dismissiveness was like a slap in the face. "This isn't about personal grievances," Marcus countered, his voice rising above the murmurs. "This is about creating a workplace where everyone feels safe and valued. We deserve to be heard." Richard's eyes narrowed, and he took a step forward, towering over Marcus. "I suggest you and your group reconsider your approach. This kind of behavior could have serious consequences." "Consequences?" Marcus echoed, his voice steady. "The real consequences are the lives and careers affected by a toxic culture. We're not backing down." The room was electric, the employees caught in a crossfire of emotions between loyalty to their CEO and the undeniable truth Marcus and his group were presenting. As the tension escalated, Marcus felt a resolve stronger than ever. This fight was far from over, and he was ready to take it to the next level. Marcus Thompson stared out the window of his office, the skyline of New York City shimmering under the midday sun. But the view did little to ease the turmoil brewing inside him. The media circus surrounding him had morphed his life into a spectacle, a distorted narrative that painted him as a criminal instead of the accomplished executive he was. He had spent countless hours preparing for this moment, but now it felt like the walls were closing in. Just then, his phone buzzed on the desk, pulling him from his reverie. It was a message from Sarah, the journalist who had been following his story. "Marcus, I have some information that might interest you. Can we meet?" His heart raced. Sarah had been a beacon of hope, someone who could help him shed light on the dark corners of his company's practices. He quickly typed back, "Yes, where and when?" Not long after, they met at a small cafe a few blocks from the office. The air was thick with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, but Marcus hardly noticed. His mind was focused on the unfolding drama of his life. When Sarah arrived, her expression was grave. "Marcus, I've been digging into Richard Blake's history," she began, her voice low. "What I found is troubling. There have been multiple claims of racial discrimination over the years, and each time they were swept under the rug." Marcus leaned forward, his pulse quickening. "What do you mean? Are you saying Richard has been covering this up?" Sarah nodded, her eyes locking onto his. "Yes. It seems he has a pattern of discrediting anyone who raises concerns about racial bias. He's more concerned about the company's image than the employees' well-being." Marcus clenched his fists, anger boiling within him. "This is bigger than I thought. If he's been doing this for years, think about all the people who have suffered in silence." "Exactly," Sarah responded. "And I believe we can use this information to expose him. If we can gather enough evidence to back up these claims, we can create a real impact." Marcus felt a surge of determination. "What do we need to do?" "We'll need documentation, testimonials, and possibly even insider accounts. This won't be easy, but I believe we can make it happen," she replied, her voice filled with conviction. As they brainstormed their next steps, Marcus felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. This was a chance not only to clear his name, but to shine a light on the systemic issues plaguing his workplace. They spent the next few hours strategizing, laying out a plan that would take time but could potentially change the course of the company's future. After their meeting, Marcus returned to his office, a new sense of purpose driving him. He began reaching out to colleagues discreetly, gathering accounts of their experiences with discrimination. He was surprised by how many were willing to share their stories, some even expressing gratitude for his bravery in speaking out. One afternoon, Marcus gathered a small group of trusted colleagues in a conference room. "Thank you all for coming," he said, looking around at the familiar faces. "I know things have been tough lately, but together, we can address these issues. We need to unify our voices and demand change." A young woman named Tasha spoke up, her voice shaking slightly. "I've been afraid to say anything, but I've witnessed how the security team treats Black employees. It's not just you, Marcus. It's systemic." "Exactly," Marcus replied, feeling the weight of their shared experiences. "We need to prepare to present our findings to the leadership. If we stand together, we can't be ignored." As the group discussed their next steps, Marcus felt a sense of camaraderie that had been absent before. They were no longer isolated individuals, but a coalition united by a common goal. However, as Marcus dove deeper into the investigation, he began to receive anonymous threats urging him to back down. One evening, he found a note slipped under his office door. "Stop digging. It's not worth it." He felt a knot form in his stomach. The threats were a clear indication that someone was watching him, trying to intimidate him into silence. He shared the note with Sarah, who looked equally concerned. "This is serious, Marcus. They're trying to scare you. But you need to decide if you're willing to fight back." "I didn't come this far just to back down," he replied, his voice steady. "If anything, this just fuels my determination. We need to go public." With renewed resolve, Marcus and Sarah began planning a press conference where they could present their findings and share their stories. It was a risky move, but one they believed could create the necessary pressure for change. As they prepared, Marcus found himself pacing the floor, anxiety gnawing at him. "Are you ready for this?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence. "I have to be," Marcus said, his voice firm, "not just for me, but for everyone who has been silenced. It's time we make our voices heard." As the day of the conference approached, the weight of what lay ahead settled heavily on his shoulders. Would he be able to withstand the backlash, the threats, and the powerful forces working against him? He didn't have all the answers, but one thing was clear. This fight was far from over. Marcus stood behind the podium, his heart racing as he gazed out at the sea of cameras and reporters gathered for the press conference. The room buzzed with anticipation, the air thick with the weight of expectation. He could see Sarah at the front, her notebook poised and ready, eyes filled with encouragement. He took a deep breath, grounding himself in the moment. This was his chance, not just to share his story, but to ignite a necessary conversation about racial injustice in the workplace. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "I stand here today not just as Marcus Thompson, an executive at Tech Innovate, but as a representative of countless individuals who have faced discrimination and bias in their careers." He paused, scanning the faces in the audience, searching for a connection. "What happened to me on that fateful day was not an isolated incident. It is a reflection of systemic issues that plague our society and our workplaces." The room fell silent as he recounted the events that had led him to this moment, the humiliation, the false accusations, and the overwhelming support from those who had reached out to him in solidarity. As he spoke about the deep-seated racial profiling that had been ingrained in the company's security protocols, the atmosphere shifted. A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, and he could sense the mounting tension behind him, likely stemming from Richard's team. "Every day, people like me walk into buildings, workplaces, and communities where our worth is questioned. We are viewed through a lens of fear and suspicion, not competence and capability," Marcus continued, his passion igniting the room. "This needs to change. We must hold our leaders accountable and demand that companies implement policies that foster diversity and inclusion, rather than perpetuate biases." As he finished, the applause erupted like a thunderclap, reverberating through the hall. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment, and for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt a surge of hope. He had done it. He had spoken his truth. But he also knew that with this newfound attention came significant backlash. Just as the applause subsided, Marcus noticed Richard entering the room, flanked by a couple of board members. The tension was palpable, and he could see the fury etched on Richard's face. The CEO approached the podium with a forced smile, but his eyes were cold and calculating. "While I appreciate Marcus's passion," Richard began, his tone dripping with condescension, "I must clarify that his claims are unfounded and reckless. I will not tolerate this insubordination within our ranks. I am calling for an immediate review of Marcus's position at the company." Gasps echoed through the audience. Marcus felt the blood rush to his face, but he remained composed, grounding himself in the knowledge that he had allies. The board members exchanged glances, their expressions revealing a mix of concern and uncertainty. "Richard," Marcus interjected firmly, "these issues are not just personal grievances. They are systemic problems that need to be addressed. Silencing me will not erase the truth." It will only highlight the desperate measures you are willing to take to maintain the status quo. The room was charged with tension, the atmosphere electric as supporters among the audience began murmuring their agreement. Richard's face darkened, and he stepped closer to the podium, his voice a low growl. "You've crossed a line, Marcus. This is a professional organization, not a platform for your personal agenda." As the confrontation escalated, Marcus felt Lisa's presence behind him, her unwavering support bolstering his resolve. He could almost hear her voice in the back of his mind, "Stay strong. You have allies now." After the press conference, the fallout was immediate and intense. News outlets broadcasted the events, framing the conflict as a battle between Marcus and the company's leadership. Social media exploded with support for Marcus, but it also drew the ire of Richard and his loyalists. Later that evening, as Marcus and Lisa sat together in their living room, the weight of the day hung heavily in the air. "I can't believe how far you've come," Lisa said, squeezing his hand. "You have so many people rallying behind you now. Don't lose sight of that." "I know," he replied, his voice heavy with contemplation, "but I can't shake the feeling that this is just the beginning. Richard won't let this go easily. He's already made it clear that he wants me out." Just as he spoke, his phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Sarah. "Marcus, I have something important. Meet me at the cafe tomorrow morning. You need to hear this." "What is it?" Lisa asked, curiosity piqued. "I don't know," Marcus replied, his heart quickening with anticipation, "but it sounds urgent. Maybe she has more information about Richard and the security team." As they settled in for the night, Marcus felt a mix of anxiety and hope. He was navigating a treacherous path, but he was not alone. With allies like Lisa and Sarah by his side, he was ready to face whatever came next. The fight for justice had only just begun, and he was determined to see it through to the end. The atmosphere in the boardroom was electric as Marcus Thompson stood before the members of the executive team, his heart pounding in his chest. He had come prepared, armed not only with determination but also with a hidden audio recording that could expose the insidious undercurrents of racism that had plagued his workplace. The long wooden table gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, reflecting the tense faces of the board members who had been entrenched in discussions about the company's future. Richard Blake, the CEO, sat at the head of the table, his expression a mask of confidence that Marcus was ready to shatter. "Thank you for gathering today," Richard began, his voice smooth but laced with an undertone of unease. "We're here to discuss the future of our company and the recent events surrounding Marcus Thompson." Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "Before we proceed, I'd like to share something important," he interjected, his voice steady yet resolute. He clicked play on the small device in his hand, and the room fell silent. The recording crackled to life, filling the air with Richard's voice. Manipulative, calculating, and deeply troubling. "We have to keep the narrative in our favor. If we can discredit Thompson and his group, we can maintain control of the situation." Richard's voice echoed ominously, each word striking like a hammer against the wall of complacency that surrounded them. Gasps filled the room as the board members processed what they were hearing. Richard's facade began to crack, his eyes darting from Marcus to the others, realization dawning upon him like a cold wave. This is taken out of context," he stammered, scrambling to regain his footing. "Out of context?" Marcus shot back, his voice rising. "This is not a matter of context, Richard. This is evidence of systemic racism rooted in our organization. You've perpetuated an environment where people like me are treated as intruders in our own workplace." The tension was palpable, and board members exchanged nervous glances. Some looked horrified, while others appeared skeptical. Marcus pressed on, fueled by the urgency of the moment. "I've faced humiliation, not just as an individual but as a representation of every marginalized voice in this company. We deserve better than this." A tall, middle-aged woman, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke up. "Marcus, what you're saying is alarming, but we need to hear more about how this has affected the culture here. We cannot ignore it any longer." Her voice was firm, resonating with the gravity of the situation. Richard's face turned red, his composure slipping further. "This is an attack on the integrity of this company. He gestured wildly, trying to regain control. We cannot allow this to spiral out of hand. But the tide had turned. One by one, board members began to voice their support for Marcus, acknowledging the need for change. The discussions grew heated, and after what felt like an eternity, they reached a pivotal moment. A vote was called to remove Richard from his position as CEO. The result was a resounding yes, and the room erupted into murmurs of disbelief and relief. As the news spread quickly through the company and the media, Marcus found himself in a whirlwind of attention. He had become a symbol of resistance against corporate racism, a beacon of hope for those who had felt silenced for too long. The fight was far from over, but this was a significant victory, a step towards dismantling the barriers that had kept so many marginalized voices in the shadows. In the aftermath, Marcus received an unexpected offer to lead the company's diversity initiatives, a role that would allow him to implement the changes he had been advocating for. Sitting in his office, he reflected on his journey, the struggles, the betrayals, and the resilience it took to stand up against a system designed to keep him down. He looked out of the window at the bustling streets of New York City below, the energy of the city mirroring the renewed hope in his heart. "This fight isn't just for me," he whispered to himself, a smile slowly forming. "It's for everyone who has ever felt less than, for everyone who has been overlooked. Together, we can rewrite this narrative." With that thought, he felt a sense of purpose wash over him. The journey ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to embrace it, knowing that change was not just possible, it was inevitable when people stood united.